bright studio lights of the Kelly Clarkson show illuminated the stage as the audience applauded warmly. Sitting across from the cheerful host, Kelly Clarkson was the rising Hollywood star, Diego Calva. The atmosphere looked friendly at first. Kelly smiled brightly, flipping through her cue cards while the crowd slowly quieted down. "Everyone, please welcome the incredibly talented Diego Calva," Kelly said enthusiastically. The audience clapped again as Diego waved politely. He leaned slightly forward in his chair, smiling, though there was a faint seriousness in his eyes. "Diego, it's so great to have you here," Kelly began. "Your recent work has been getting a lot of attention, especially after your breakout role in Babylon. How has life changed for you since that film?" Diego smiled politely. "It's been intense," he said with a small laugh, "but also beautiful. I'm grateful for the opportunities." The interview started smoothly. Kelly asked about Diego's journey from Mexico to Hollywood, his early struggles and his dreams as an actor. The audience listened closely, laughing at his stories about auditions and his first experiences on big movie sets. But then the conversation slowly shifted. Kelly glanced at her card and hesitated for a moment before asking, "There's been a lot of talk online about some disagreements you've had with certain directors recently. Some reports say there were heated moments behind the scenes. What really happened?" Diego's smile faded slightly. He adjusted his posture and folded his hands together. "I'm not sure what reports you're referring to," he said calmly. Kelly continued, her tone still friendly but curious. "Well, some insiders claimed you walked off a set during production last year. They say it caused a lot of tension," the audience murmured softly. Diego took a slow breath. "I prefer not to discuss rumors," he replied. For a moment, the studio felt unusually quiet. Kelly nodded, but the curiosity in her voice remained. "Of course, but fans are always curious about what happens behind the scenes. Some say there was a major argument." Diego looked down briefly, then back up. "I respect my colleagues," he said firmly, "and I believe private matters should stay private." The tension in the room became noticeable. The audience could sense it. Even Kelly paused for a second, realizing the conversation had stepped onto uncomfortable ground. Trying to lighten the mood, she smiled again. "Fair enough. Let's talk about your next project." But something had already changed. Diego leaned back slightly, his expression more serious now. The friendly tone of the interview had faded, replaced by an awkward energy hanging in the air. And this was only the beginning, because within minutes, the conversation would take a turn no one in the studio expected. The atmosphere in the studio of the Kelly Clarkson show had become noticeably different. Just minutes earlier, the audience had been laughing and applauding. Now there was a strange silence as Kelly Clarkson glanced again at her cue cards, clearly debating whether to continue down the same path. Across from her, Diego Calva sat still, his posture calm but guarded. Kelly took a breath and smiled again, attempting to bring the energy back. "All right," she said lightly. "Let's shift gears a little. Your fans love hearing about your creative process. When you prepare for a role, what's the first thing you focus on?" Diego relaxed slightly. "The character's emotions," he explained. "I try to understand their fears, their hopes, what drives them." The audience nodded and listened carefully. Kelly leaned forward. "That's fascinating, especially with complex roles like the one you played in Babylon. That film had some intense scenes." Diego smiled faintly. "Yes, it was a challenging experience. For a moment, it seemed the tension had passed. But then Kelly asked another question, one that would completely shift the mood again. "Speaking of challenges," she said, "some critics say your strong personality has caused conflicts on set. They describe you as difficult to work with." A wave of murmurs spread through the audience. Diego blinked slowly. For a few seconds, he didn't respond. Kelly quickly added, "I'm not saying it's true, of course. I just wanted to give you the chance to respond." The camera zoomed in slightly on Diego's face. His expression had hardened. "I think," he began slowly, "that sometimes people confuse passion with difficulty." The audience stayed silent. When actors care deeply about their work, disagreements can happen. But that doesn't mean someone is difficult. Kelly nodded, but then asked another follow-up. "So those reports about you arguing with producers, those were exaggerated?" Diego exhaled quietly. "They were private conversations," he said firmly. "And honestly, I didn't expect to discuss them here." The tension returned instantly. Kelly looked slightly surprised. "Well, our viewers are always interested in the truth," she replied carefully. Diego leaned forward now. "And the truth," he said calmly but firmly, "is that some stories get repeated so many times they start sounding real, even when they aren't." The audience exchanged glances. The mood had shifted again, but this time it felt heavier. Kelly attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the damage had already been done, because Diego now seemed visibly uncomfortable. He glanced briefly toward the side of the stage where producers were watching. Then he looked back at Kelly. And what happened next would leave the entire studio stunned. The silence inside the Kelly Clarkson Show studio felt almost surreal. The cameras were still rolling. The audience sat frozen in their seats, and the tension between Kelly Clarkson and Diego Calva had become impossible to ignore. Kelly shifted slightly in her chair. "Diego," she said carefully, "I hope none of these questions make you uncomfortable. We just try to ask what people are curious about." Diego looked at her quietly for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand curiosity," he said, "but sometimes curiosity crosses into speculation." The audience remained silent. Kelly tried to smile. "That's fair. Maybe we should talk about your upcoming film instead." But Diego didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "You know," he said calmly, "when I agreed to come here, I thought we would talk about my work. My films, my journey." Kelly blinked, slightly caught off guard. "And we did," she replied softly. "Yes," Diego said. "At first?" There was a pause. Then he stood up. The movement surprised everyone. A ripple of whispers spread through the audience as cameras quickly adjusted. Kelly looked up at him, confused. "Diego," he gave a polite but firm smile. "I respect you," he said, "but I don't feel comfortable continuing this conversation." The studio fell completely silent. Kelly seemed genuinely surprised. "Wait, are you leaving?" Diego nodded slightly. "I think it's better if I do." Gasps could be heard from different parts of the audience. Kelly raised her hand slightly, trying to calm the situation. "We can change the topic." But Diego had already stepped away from the chair. He turned briefly toward the audience and gave a small appreciative nod. "Thank you for your support," he said. Then, without another word, he walked toward the side of the stage. For several seconds, no one moved. Even the production crew seemed unsure what to do. Finally, Kelly looked toward the cameras and gave an awkward but professional smile. "Well," she said softly, "that was unexpected." Some audience members chuckled nervously, while others continued whispering about what they had just witnessed. Moments later, the show cut to a commercial break, but the moment had already become unforgettable. Clips of the tense exchange and Diego's sudden walkout would soon spread across social media, sparking debates among fans. Some viewers believed Diego had been unfairly pushed into discussing rumors. Others argued that the host had simply asked the questions many people wanted answered. But one thing was certain. What began as a normal interview had turned into one of the most talked about moments in the history of the Kelly Clarkson Show. And neither Kelly Clarkson nor Diego Calva would forget it anytime soon.